Don't marry her." The girl's voice cut through the church bells like a crack in glass. She stood barefoot on the stone steps, too small for the oversized hoodie hanging from her shoulders, her dark eyes fixed on the groom, as if her life depended on it. Victor Hale froze mid-step, one hand still adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit cameras. Flashing behind him the perfect wedding, paused by a child no one had invited. Her name was Aisha, a black girl no older than 12, living on the streets invisible to most except in this moment. Around them, the white flowers, the hushed whispers, the polished smiles, all felt suddenly unreal. Victor had walked toward that church door, believing he was stepping into love stability and a future carefully arranged for him. But Aisha's trembling certainty shattered the illusion. This wasn't a plea for money. It was a warning. People tried to pull her away. Security reached for her arm. Yet she held on not to Victor's suit, but to the truth she carried. She knew something she shouldn't have known. Something whispered behind closed doors, spoken in legal language, meant to trap a man who trusted too easily. And Victor felt it instantly, the cold realization that the life he was about to enter had been designed without his consent. Behind the door waited Clara Whitmore, flawless in white, smiling for the crowd. Around Victor stood power, wealth, reputation, everything that had always told him to keep walking forward. But in front of him stood Aisha, shaking, hungry, brave, asking him to stop. In that suspended second, Victor understood something simple and devastating. If he crossed that threshold, he might never walk out the same. And sometimes the voice that saves you doesn't come from privilege or polish, but from the child the world taught you to ignore. Victor bent slightly, lowering himself to Aisha's height, as if the world around them had faded into a distant echo. "What did you hear?" he asked, his voice calm, though something inside him was splintering. Aisha swallowed. Her fingers clenched the frayed edge of her hoodie. "They said a word," she whispered. "A word people don't use outside offices with locked doors." She hesitated, eyes darting toward the church entrance, toward the woman in white, waiting behind polished wood and rehearsed smiles. Then she said it softly, but clearly enough to land like a blow. "Mirror clause." Victor's breath caught. The sound of that phrase did something no accusation could do. It didn't shock the crowd, but it shattered him. Because that term didn't belong to the street or to a child. It belonged to a private room, a leather-bound folder, a single meeting he remembered too well. A meeting where lawyers spoke in calm voices about protection, about contingencies, about control disguised as care. A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. Some laughed nervously. Others scoffed. A child repeating words she didn't understand, they thought. But Victor understood. Every syllable pressed against his ribs, tight and cold. He turned slowly, eyes finding the man holding the briefcase near the altar. The lawyer's face didn't change, but his jaw stiffened just enough. Aisha kept going, her voice trembling but determined. She said, "Once you sign it reflects everything. Your money, your decisions. Like a shadow that moves when you move, but you can't pull it off." Her words were clumsy, borrowed from overheard conversations, yet terrifyingly precise. Victor straightened. Around him the air thickened with discomfort, with impatience, with the unspoken demand to continue the performance. Clara Whitmore stepped forward. Smile, flawless, eyes sharp beneath the veil. "She's confused," she said sweetly. "She must have heard something on television." But Victor no longer heard Clara. He was staring at Aisha, realizing the impossible truth. A child with nothing had just named the trap his entire world had failed to warn him about. And in that moment he knew the danger wasn't scandal or embarrassment. The danger was silence. Victor felt the truth assembling itself piece by piece, heavy and unavoidable. The girl hadn't come with rumors or guesses, she had come with fragments of a plan. a plan whispered behind doors that assumed no one powerless was listening. They talked about after the ceremony, Aisha said quietly, her voice barely rising above the murmurs of the crowd. They said you'd be happy distracted, that you'd sign because everyone would be watching, because saying no would feel rude. Embarrassing. She paused, eyes lowering. They laughed about that part. Something inside Victor hardened. He could almost see it now, the pen placed gently in his hand. The reassuring smiles, the words, just a form, just a confirmation. He had lived his entire life surrounded by people who spoke softly while deciding loudly for him. He had mistaken comfort for loyalty, elegance for honesty. A man stepped closer from the church doorway, the lawyer briefcase pressed to his chest like a shield. "Sir," he said, measured and polite, "this is highly inappropriate. A child's misunderstanding should not disrupt." Enough, Victor cut in, surprising even himself. His voice did not shake. The lawyer stopped. Aisha looked up, encouraged. "They said once you sign it's done," she continued. "That everything moves quietly. Your companies, your foundation, your name." She swallowed hard. "They said if you fight it later, they'll make you look crazy." Ungrateful. Victor felt the weight of that word foundation. His heart sank. That was the line. The one place he believed still belonged to something good. And they had planned to use it like a blade. Behind him, the guests shifted uncomfortably. Cameras kept recording. Somewhere church music still played, oblivious. Clara's smile had faded, now replaced by something sharp and impatient. Victor looked down at Aisha, at her thin arms. Her courage stretched far beyond her years. She had nothing to gain from this. No money, no protection, only risk. And that was when he understood the deepest cruelty of the plan. It relied not just on contracts and signatures, but on the assumption that no one like her would ever be believed. Victor straightened, stepping away from the church door. "We're not going inside," he said calmly. The silence that followed was louder than any bell. The reaction was immediate and cruelly predictable. Laughter rippled through the guests. First thin and nervous, the kind that rises when people don't know where to place their discomfort. Someone muttered that it was a stunt. Another whispered that children these days learned too much from the internet. Phones lifted higher. A moment meant to be sacred began turning into content. Clara stepped forward fully now, veil catching the light, her voice soft enough to sound kind. "Victor," she said, reaching for his arm, careful not to squeeze. "This is getting out of hand. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she heard." Her smile returned, carefully measured for the cameras. "Please, don't let this turn into a scene." Behind her, the lawyer cleared his throat and joined in tone, smooth, professional. "Sir, with all due respect, this is misinformation. Contracts can sound frightening when taken out of context. I strongly advise you not to make life-altering decisions based on overheard fragments." He gestured vaguely toward Aisha, as if she were static, not a person. Aisha shrank under the weight of their voices. She felt it happening, the familiar slide into invisibility. Adults talking over her, around her, about her. She took a half step back, instinctively preparing to disappear before she caused more trouble. Victor noticed. He noticed how Clara never said it isn't true. He noticed how the lawyer spoke about tone and context, but never denied the words. And most of all, he noticed how quickly the narrative was being rewritten. Not, "Is there a trap?" but "Why is a homeless child ruining a wedding?" Pressure pressed in from all sides. His name, his reputation, his family watching from the front pew. The unspoken threat humming beneath every polite sentence. "If you stop now, you will pay for it later." Victor. Clara whispered closer, now her voice tightening just enough to slip past the microphones. "You're humiliating me. Everyone is watching." That was it. Not "you're wrong." Not "this isn't happening." Just "you're embarrassing us." Victor felt something shift, quiet, final. He looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the flawless image that had been built around him his entire life. Then he looked back at Aisha, standing alone, bracing herself for disbelief. He stepped away from Clara's hand. No, he said, not loudly, but clearly enough to cut through the noise. What's happening is that you're trying to silence her because it's inconvenient. Gasps followed. Clara's face hardened for a fraction of a second before she recovered. The lawyer moved again, sharper this time. Sir, if you continue, there will be legal consequences. For you. For her. Victor placed himself between them and Aisha without thinking. Then there will be consequences, he said. But not for telling the truth. In that moment, the power in the space shifted. The people who had come to witness a wedding were suddenly watching something else entirely, a man choosing to listen, and a child realizing slowly, painfully, that this time someone wasn't going to look away. The moment truth takes shape, it stops being fragile. Aisha hesitated, as if weighing the cost of being believed. Then slowly she reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out something small, wrapped in a crumpled napkin stained by dirt and rain. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. I kept this, she said, her voice barely steady. I knew no one would listen without it. Victor leaned closer. So did everyone else. It wasn't much, just a torn corner of paper, but the texture was unmistakable, thick, expensive stock. Legal. Official. A partial stamp bled blue along the edge, and beneath it, underlined in deliberate ink, were words that made Victor's chest tighten. Immediate activation. Signature required on the same day. The air shifted. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Victor took the paper, careful, reverent, as though it might cut him. He recognized the formatting instantly. He had seen it before in boardrooms and private meetings where trust was assumed, not questioned. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a child mishearing adult talk. This was preparation. They dropped it, Aisha said quickly, afraid the moment might slip away. When they opened the door, I didn't steal it. I just kept it. Because I knew today would come. The lawyer's face drained of color before he could stop it. Clara's breath caught just once, but Victor saw it. That single fracture told him more than any confession could. Still they tried. That's meaningless without context. The lawyer snapped, his calm finally cracking. Fragments can be manipulated. Aisha reached deeper into her pocket and pulled out something else. A small USB drive. Silence fell hard and absolute. They talked on the phone, she said. They didn't know I could hear. I recorded what I could. I didn't know the words then, but I remembered them. Victor closed his fingers around the drive. It felt heavier than it should have, like proof always does. Around him, phones wavered. Smiles vanished. This was no longer gossip. This was evidence. He looked at Clara. You said this was nothing, he said quietly. Then why does everything you've done today depend on me signing something after the ceremony? She didn't answer. She couldn't. For the first time, Victor understood the full shape of the trap. Not just the paperwork, but the timing, the pressure, the spectacle. The assumption that shame would be stronger than caution. And standing beside him was the one person who had broken the machine simply by paying attention. A child with no power, no shelter, no reason to speak except conscience. Victor straightened, holding the paper and the USB like a shield. This doesn't disappear, he said. Not today, not ever. Aisha exhaled for the first time since she'd spoken. Not relief, not safety, but something just as rare, being believed. The shift was immediate and violent in its subtlety. What had been smiles and murmurs hardened into strategy. The lawyer leaned in close to Clara, whispering fast. A sharp nod followed. Then a hand signal almost invisible cut through the air. Security moved. Aisha felt it before she saw it, the way adults suddenly stopped looking at Victor and started looking at her. Not with curiosity, with intent. The kind that measures distance and decides how easily something can be removed. Let's get her out of here, someone muttered. This has gone far enough. A guard reached for Aisha's arm. She flinched instinctively, shrinking her body, remembering other hands, other moments when adults decided she was a problem to be solved. Her feet slid back on the stone steps. For a split second, the courage that had carried her this far wavered. Victor stepped forward without hesitation. "Don't touch her," he said. The guard paused, surprised. The crowd stirred, confused, hungry for resolution. Clara's voice rose carefully, tuned for the cameras. "Victor, please. You're escalating this. She's unsafe here. Let us help her." "Help!" The word landed wrong, because help didn't grab your arm. Help didn't drag you away when you spoke the truth. Help didn't arrive only after you became inconvenient. Another guard moved closer. Someone shouted that the police should be called on the child. A phone fell. A gasp rippled as bodies shifted, pressing in the neat ceremony, dissolving into disorder. Aisha stumbled as a hand caught her sleeve. She dropped to her knees, palms scraping against the stone. Pain flared, but she didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears rarely stopped adults who had already decided. "Stop!" Victor's voice cut through the noise, raw now. He pushed forward, placing himself between Aisha and the reaching hands. "This ends now." But chaos feeds on moments like this. From the edge of the crowd, a man in a dark jacket moved too fast, too deliberately. Not a guest, not confused. His eyes locked on Aisha, calculating. He reached as if to help her up. "No," Aisha whispered, terror snapping her voice thin. "He's not!" Victor saw it. He shoved the man back just enough. The man staggered, then raised his hands dramatically. "He attacked me," he shouted loud enough for every camera to catch. The narrative flipped in an instant. Gasps. Accusations. Clara's sharp intake of breath, perfectly timed. "Victor! What are you doing?" she cried, eyes wide, voice trembling for the audience. Aisha scrambled to her feet, shaking. "He was going to take me," she said louder now, desperate. "I know that look." Victor stood firm, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that this was no longer about embarrassment or contracts. This was about control. And the moment someone tries to silence the truth by force, the truth stops being a secret and becomes a threat. Victor felt it then, unmistakably, whatever they had planned for after the wedding. Whatever paper waited on the other side of those doors, it had already failed. Because they were no longer hiding. They were hunting. Victor made the decision without ceremony, without announcement. He simply stopped reacting and started acting. "Come with me," he said to Aisha, his voice low but steady. "Not stay, not wait. Come." He took a step sideways, angling his body so the crowd, the guards, the cameras were no longer a wall, but noise behind him. He did not grab her hand. He offered it. Aisha hesitated only a second before placing her small, shaking fingers into his palm. The church door loomed behind them like an open mouth, dark and expectant. Victor didn't look at it again. They moved toward the side of the building, away from the music, away from the staged smiles, toward the narrow passage where stone replaced spectacle. People tried to follow. A guard raised a hand to block them. Victor lifted his own. "No one else," he said. "Not today." The air changed as soon as they stepped into the side corridor, cooler, quieter, stripped of performance. The noise of the crowd dulled into a distant hum. Aisha's breathing was shallow, her steps uneven, but she didn't let go. Not once. "This is where it happened," she whispered, pointing to a small wooden door. "I was sitting there." They thought no one was listening. Victor felt a strange mix of dread and clarity. This space wasn't grand. No flowers, no witnesses. Just stone walls, and the truth echoing between them. He knelt briefly, meeting her eyes. "You did the hardest part," he said. "You spoke. From here on, I handle it." She searched his face not for promises, but for cracks. Finding none, she nodded. Footsteps sounded behind them. Clara's voice followed, sharp, now stripped of softness. "If you walk away like this," she called, "you will regret it. This will destroy you." Victor stood. "No," he said calmly. "What would destroy me is signing my life away because I was too afraid of embarrassment to listen to a child." He pulled out his phone and scrolled past names he had relied on for years. Past family. Past familiarity. He stopped on a contact he had almost forgotten, an independent attorney, someone with no ties, no favors owed. "This ends with daylight," he said more to himself than anyone else. "With someone who doesn't belong to your circle." Aisha's grip tightened as the call rang. In that moment, Victor understood something fundamental. Walking away from the altar wasn't the scandal. Staying silent would have been. Behind them, the ceremony unraveled. Ahead of them, uncertainty waited. But beside him was a child who had already risked everything to tell the truth. Victor took a breath and stepped forward. For the first time that day, he wasn't being led. He was choosing. Victor didn't realize how heavy the silence had been until it finally lifted. The car door closed, sealing off the noise of the church, the shouting, the cameras, the life that had almost swallowed him whole. Inside, there was only the low hum of the engine, and Aisha sitting stiffly beside him, her hands folded tight in her lap, as if letting go might make everything fall apart again. She stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Not asking where they were going, only trusting that they were going away. "You're safe," Victor said quietly, not as a promise meant to impress, but as a statement he was prepared to defend. Aisha nodded, though her shoulders stayed tense. Safety for her was never immediate. It arrived slowly, cautiously after proof. Victor understood that now. What she had given him wasn't just information, it was courage, the kind that forces a decision you can't undo. He looked at her and felt something settle in his chest. Not relief. Responsibility. She hadn't stopped a wedding. She had stopped a machine. A machine built on pressure, silence, and the belief that no one would listen to a child without power. And Victor knew that if he had chosen comfort over truth, if he had walked into that church simply to avoid shame, the cost would have followed him for the rest of his life. As the city lights stretched ahead, he understood the real turning point wasn't leaving the altar. It was choosing to listen when it would have been easier not to. Sometimes the most important warnings don't come from experts, authority figures, or people who look powerful. They come from voices society ignores. Real integrity isn't proven when the truth is convenient. It's proven when the truth threatens your comfort, your image, and your pride. If this story moved you, ask yourself, who have you stopped listening to because it felt uncomfortable? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling them, because one voice when heard can change everything.